Good morning. Are y'all ready?
Sure we are.
All right. This is Ron Climer. I am with Keller Williams Realty in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And I've got a small audience here for this morning's session. And I told y'all in the last video that if you got any requests, I guess, for lack of a better word, to put them up. And one of the requests I had was, Ron, you mentioned working foreclosure victims in the last video, and I'd just like to know, how do we do that? Now, let me preface this by telling you this. Foreclosure victims are, you might say, timely. And you know how Gary Keller talks about a shift in the marketplace? Well, when business is good, there's not a whole lot of foreclosures. But when business is bad, there's a lot of it. In 1998, I made a living doing nothing but foreclosures. It was foreclosure central that year, and all I had time to do. That's all I did. But here's what you do if you want to work foreclosures. And by the way, you got to have I don't know what the word is. You got to be able to put up with people to do foreclosures, because a lot of people don't realize this, but when your house is being foreclosed on, would y'all agree with me that's a pretty stressful event in somebody's life?
Yes.
And I can tell you from years of working with foreclosure victims, 9 times out of 10, this is not the most stressful thing going on in their life. They've got a spouse that's recently passed away. They've got a spouse that's recently ran away. They've got a job that just evaporated, whatever the situation is. And it's not always a financial problem. Sometimes it's other problems. But if you want to work foreclosures, here's what you do. You go to the courthouse, and I went down, I mentioned Nick. I went down to the courthouse with Nick about a year ago here in Hendersonville. And what you do, you go to, in North Carolina, you go to the Register of Deeds. In some other state like Florida, it's the clerk of the circuit court. But when somebody's being foreclosed on, they quit making their payments to the First National Bank. And they quit making their payments somewhere between 90 and 180 days ago. So the bank has filed a lawsuit called a foreclosure action. And you go down to the Register of Deeds and just ask them, say, can I see some recent foreclosure files? And what I would recommend for you new people is just go down there and read some files. I've asked people, say, Ron, how do you learn about foreclosures? You go read about 150 files. You'll be an expert by the time you've read those files, because that's exactly the way I started back in the early 90s. I just started reading files, and something you didn't know what it means, you ask somebody, and pretty soon you know what's going on. But what happens with foreclosures is you have a file, and it's a lawsuit, and the plaintiff, which is the First National Bank, they have allegations. And the allegation is John Smith borrowed $100,000 from us. John Smith quit paying 90 days ago. John Smith owes us $99,412.50 plus interest. And you can tell everything about it. If there's an inferior mortgage, they will mention that. The Second National Bank has a second mortgage in the amount of $29,000, blah, blah, blah. And they'll tell you everything that you need to know about the property. And if they have any other addresses for non-Smith, it'll say John Smith resides at 123 Main Street in Miami, Florida. And so they have all the information there that you could use. And a couple of things you can do. The hardest part about foreclosures oftentimes is finding the people. And Dick Tracy has got nothing on me, because once I got into this, I could find people. And times have changed, a lot of things have changed since the 90s, but finding the people is still a challenge. Now, by the way, if you've ever looked for expireds, sometimes expireds are hard to find, but they're not hiding from you. Foreclosure victims are hiding from you, because they not only are foreclosed on their house, they got other creditors looking for them, hunting them down, and who knows what other things. But all you do is you just take that information out of the file and knock on the door if they're living in the house. which, by the way, they should be living in the house. I'm amazed how many people move out of the house. House is sitting there, they're living in it for free, and made a payment for 90 days, and probably won't have to make another one for 6 more months, but they'll move into a $1,000 a month apartment. I don't know why they do that. But go out and knock on the door, and I learned early, don't knock on the door and say, hey, I see you're being foreclosed on. That's just kind of crass. I learned that by being crass. But what I learned to say is, I was down at the courthouse searching records and I saw your name. Well, they know why their name was at the courthouse. By the way, if you see in that file in the courthouse, the deputy sheriff has knocked on their door and handed them a copy of that file. So, you know, a lot of times you say, oh, I didn't even know that. Trust me, they know. But, you know, oh, well, I hate to be the one to tell you. Now, sometimes I am the one to tell them, because more than once, I told you I could find them. I've found them when the process server can't find them. And so if you find them, you know, and you tell them what's going on. Now, most of the time, you know, they've just kind of thrown their hands up in disgust. Just, we just give up. Well, I like to tell them that you can do that if you want to. You can just give up. Your house is worth, looks to me like about $125,000. You owe about $129,000 on it, so you can just throw your hands up in disgust. But if you do, let me tell you what's going to happen. Your house is going to be foreclosed on. Deputy sheriff's going to come and kick you out the street. And you're going to think, well, I can handle that. I can handle that too. But I tell you what you can't handle. The bank's going to come back and sue you for a deficiency judgment. And your house is going to sell at auction for probably about $75,000 cash. And the bank's going to sue you for the difference between the $129,000 you owe and the $75,000. You're going to get a judgment against you for $50,000. That's going to be a problem for you for the rest of your life. And I know you think things can't get any worse, but trust me, they can't get any worse, but worse can last longer. And so do yourself a favor. Let's get together. Let me show you how I can bail you out of this bad situation. Now, by the way, as I said, you got to have you got to be tuned into that type personality to even deal with this in the first place. But the second part, once you list the house, you're probably going to end up negotiating a short sale with the bank. And that's a whole new set of aggravation. Now, if times are good, you might just want to pass on this opportunity altogether. But if there's a shift in the marketplace, and believe me, there was a time in history when if you couldn't do foreclosures and short sales, you might as well turn in your license. Now, will that time come again? Who knows? You know, who knows? There's not much that I haven't seen come through twice since I started selling real estate 100 years ago. So stuff happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are y'all with me?
Yep.
Yes.
And I would tell you, if you want to find out if this is for you, just go to the courthouse, read some files, and by the way, the people at the courthouse, they're employees of the county. They're as nice can be. They'll show you anything. They got the patience of Job. I've been to 50 courthouses in my life. I've never had one of the clerks treat me rudely or anything. They just, that's what they do. And now, so pursue that if you think you might like to. And so Kay asked me, Ron, how do you work foreclosures? That's absolutely it. Instead of looking on Craigslist for sale by owners or the MLS for expired listings, you go to the courthouse. And most of the time you'll find the owners as receptive to you as they can be under the circumstances, because they're having the worst day of their life. And if you don't look like part of the solution, you better improve your looks. You better start looking like part of the solution, because they are desperately looking for a solution. They want a solution. And so that's exactly the way that works. You got any questions? You think? Y'all want to hear the part about the owner financing or no? Yes or no?
Yes, sure.
Okay, let me go ahead and cover that because Tyson had put a comment down that he wanted to hear about that. But whenever I list a house, and especially vacant land, I always ask the people if it's free and clear. Because if a house is free and clear, here's a guy who owns a $300,000 free and clear house. Well, the easiest way to get that house financed is somebody puts $50,000 down and the owner holds a mortgage for $250,000. You'd be sitting at the closing table in a week if everybody in job wants to. Would y'all agree with me that fighting with the mortgage company is about half of our job?
Yes.
You know, oh, you gotta have a job, you gotta have good credit, you gotta have job stability, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to have anything if the owner holds a mortgage, except the $50,000 to put down. And so I say, Mr. Seller, these people have offered you $50,000 down. They want you to hold a mortgage for $250,000. They're willing to pay you 6% interest, and the payments are going to be $1,500 a month. And why would Mr. Seller not do that? Well, most of the time, the reason Mr. Seller doesn't want to do it is because we, the realtor, don't know how to explain it to him. And if you stop and think about it, if Mr. Seller owns a $300,000 free and clear house, he probably has some money in the bank. Wouldn't y'all agree? I don't think that free and clear house is his only asset in the world. But he's probably got some money in the bank, and he's probably earning about 0.5% interest on that money in the bank. So why would you want to put another $250,000 in the bank at 0.5% interest in 2019? And the answer is, why don't you let Mr. Buyer pay you 6% interest on that money? Does that make sense? And does that make sense to y'all?
Yes.
Now, a lot of times, Mr. Seller will say something like, oh, Ron, we want to buy a new RV with that money. Well, with $1,500 a month income, you can buy any RV you want. Wouldn't you agree? So you got money coming in, make payments on the RV, or let your mortgage make payments on the RV. Does that make sense? By the way, we were holding a mortgage on a house we sold down in South Carolina, and we got paid off about 2 years ago. We get 8% interest. And it was like, are y'all sure you want to pay us off? Why don't you just keep paying? You know, we've been paying for about 7 years, and all of a sudden they refinanced at 3.5% and paid us off. And we didn't want to be paid off. We were happy as a clam getting that money every month and that interest.
Ron, what kind of searches do you do on the purchaser that wants to get a mortgage from the seller to try and ensure that, you know, they're in good financial shape and they'll be able to continue to make, I know there's no guarantees, but that they'll be able to make the payments?
What would Ms.
Besides a credit check, what else would you do?
Get more down payment.
Get more down?
If Mr. Seller says, Ron, I'm not sure they're going to pay me.
Right.
Well, how can we
Get as much
assuage
money
that
out of them as
fear?
you can?
Yeah, and they say, well, if they gave me $100,000 down, I feel comfortable. Let me see if they can do that. So Mr. Buyer says, okay, I'll put $100,000 down, and you hold a $200,000. And more money down is the only thing that makes sense to me.
Right.
Because, quite frankly, every foreclosure you see down at the courthouse had good credit.
Right.
Every one of them had good credit. So I'm not too big on credit. I'm big on
Down payment.
more down payment. And, which, by the way, this is a great way to buy property. You buy property.
Would you work with an attorney to draw up the contract?
Sure.
So
Or
that
not the
holds
contract, but the
them,
mortgage.
kind of binds them,
Mhm.
holds them to it.
There's an owner financing addendum to T2. So there's an addendum right there. And then when you go to closing, the attorney draws up the mortgage. But that's a cool thing to do, especially with land. It's almost impossible to get land money. So, you know, you go sell a $50,000 lot, you go sell a $50,000 lot, and the guy puts $20,000 down, finance it, then the bank's not going to loan you the other third. They think they are, but they won't, unless they can borrow it unsecured. But the seller, why wouldn't the seller I mean, which would you rather have, a vacant lot or $600 a month income? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so, anyway, that's what we got for this week, so I hope it's some value to you. And anybody got any questions? Any more? All right.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Y'all say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.